So if you take ordination in the near future, the rest of you, keep in mind the first day that you have ordination, your vows are very pure, so it's very good to make prayers for your Dharma realizations. And also today is Labab Duchen, remember? I told you. Georgie, are you on?
I'm on.
Okay, we're off. I'll just mention something about Labab. I'll just mention something about Labab Duchen today. Although if someone's watching this on DVD, it'll be some other day completely. Labab, La is referring to the God realm of the heaven of 33. Bap means to descend, like rain falls. Duchen means the holiday, the great day, great time. So this is one of the 4 holidays in the year, holy days in the year, that the Buddhists recognize that are very special. This is the day that Buddha descended from the heaven of 33, where he was during a rains retreat and teaching his mom what? Do you remember what he was teaching his mom? You know what he was saying? He was teaching his mom Abhidharma. She had passed away when he was born, remember? So to repay her kindness, he came up during one of the rain retreats and taught her Abhidharma. And then it was on today that, the 22nd of the 9th month, is that right? The Tibetan month, that he descended. So I printed out something so at the tea break you can, if you like to read, you can read. I'll leave over there. It's kind of like, some people consider it kind of like the Buddhist Mother's Day, because he had gone up to see mothers. So, any of you moms, Michelle, all the rest of you moms, Thea, all the rest of you, you can rejoice. Let's begin with a little meditation and try to quiet our minds and set a good motivation. So first, just watch your breathing. By watch, of course, it means with your mental consciousness, in some cases it might have to mean to observe your sense consciousness, such as the rising and lowering of the abdomen, or the rising and lowering of the solar plexus, or the feeling of air at the entry to the nostrils. But in a more subtle way, we can just simply watch, be aware of the movement of the air in and the movement of the air out. And then try to sense the subtle movement of the subtle airs, winds coming in and out that may precede or be in, may precede that by a fraction of a second, or maybe in harmony with that. So first, watch your breathing. mind is somewhat calm, bring your attention to the nature of your mental consciousness, the clear light nature. Let go of any conceptualizing thoughts, whether they be toward objects, visual or auditory, or states of mind, angry state of mind, or jealous state of mind, or restless state of mind. Try to see them all, subjects and objects, arising within this space-like nature of our mind. And focus on that again and again. Let go of the thoughts. You're not paying attention to your eyes or your ears, your body. The sense consciousness is attending to the outer objects. Just let go of them. Consciousness has no color or shape, no dimension. Within this clarity of your mind, recall that all living beings, throughout the extent of infinite space, are exactly equal to us in wanting to be happy, wanting to be free of suffering. They, like us, have lived in every rebirth in the past, and will continue to in the future if they remain in samsara. Like us, they want to be happy, they want to be free of suffering. There's no difference between ourself and others. Whereas cherishing ourself and ignoring others to some extent, or to a great extent, as we've done over numberless lives, only gets us into deeper trouble. It may seem to be a good strategy, but doesn't take into account the subtlety of karma. On the other hand, cherishing others more than ourselves is said to be the gateway to infinite qualities. The qualities of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the saints. all of us within cyclic existence, even the arhats that are beyond cyclic existence, who have not yet achieved enlightenment, higher bodhisattvas, eventually will have to practice the highest Yoga Tantra, transforming impure death, impure bardo, intermediate state, and impure rebirth into the three bodies of a Buddha. So for the sake of all living beings, I'm going to participate in the class tonight to learn more about that subject, listening with a fresh mind, with an alert mind, with the thought that by so doing, I'll leave the seeds to practice Highest Yoga Tantra soon in this life or in the very near future, to achieve enlightenment quickly, very quickly, so that I can spontaneously and effortlessly bring benefit to all sentient beings, lead them out of the immense sorrow, the repeated dissatisfaction that they're experiencing now, into everlasting blissful happiness. So for that reason, to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of others, I'm going to participate in the class tonight, listening, contemplating, even meditating, discussing. And then bring your attention back to present. Excuse this, what you might think is just a sweet in my mouth. Some kind of strong medicine Don just brought. I have a pretty bad cough. Chloraseptic. Whoa. Sounds like some kind of dishwasher detergent or something. It's very potent. It does taste. It tastes like dishwater. But it's stopping the cough. It's like the Dharma, right? Okay, good. So last week we began the text just barely. We read the preface, was it, or the introduction by His Holiness? What was it called? The foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which we found quite profound in and of itself. And Carla, you don't have a text? Venerable? Yes, sir. This is just the first page. Does someone else not have a text at all? Everyone else? Could you give? Oh, there's only one. Maybe you can share with Carla. Venerable Sophia needs a copy. I think I don't have any more. There she is. I don't have any in Chinese, Venerable. Oh wait, here's another one for Venerable Jime. There we go. There we go. Cool. Okay. So, let's see what's happening here. So last time we went over the title, Lamp Thoroughly Illuminating the Presentation of the Three Basic Bodies. In the title, in the Tibetan, it doesn't mention death, intermediate state, and rebirth. It kind of is implied. What are the three basic bodies? Do you know, Jesse? Did we mention last time? Did you hear what Jesse said? Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. What would you say, David? Would you agree? Are those the three basic bodies that are referred to here? Or over a cup of coffee, would you have issue with Jesse's statement?
About the total enjoyment, sort of in English versus
That's the Sambhogakaya, yeah. But here it says the basic bodies, the three basic bodies. Mark, do you have anything? Well, I think the point is that it comes out in the text that although the bodies that are the resultant bodies that we're trying to achieve are those three bodies that Jesse mentioned, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya, or the, what would you call it? The truth body, the enjoyment body, and the emanation body. We talk generally, when we talk about Buddhist tenets, and especially in Tantra, we generally divide up the path, we divide up the regimen, you might say, into the basis, the path, and the result. So the resultant bodies are these three bodies that you mentioned. But we don't have those bodies now. Those aren't the basic, the bodies in the sense of the basis. What is transformed into them is impure death, transformed into the Dharmakaya. Impure, intermediate state is transformed into Sambhogakaya. An impure rebirth, the rebirth that we take now, is transformed into the Nirmanakaya. What transforms them are the two levels of practice, the two stages of highest Yoga Tantra, the generation stage and the completion stage. So, in a sense, the basis, when it says basic bodies, it doesn't means the bodies that will eventually be achieved in their manifestation at the time of the basis. So that means death, impure bardo, impure rebirth. Okay? So the bodies that are referred to, even though we don't usually think of death, intermediate state, and rebirth as being bodies, that's how they're kind of referred to here. Okay? So we read the introduction last time, right? Namo Guru Manju Goshaya, did we do? Yeah. And we went through the 7 features of God and Goddess facing each other, or the 7, sometimes called the 7 kisses of enlightenment. So you'll see that in many contexts in Highest Yoga Tantra. So it's interesting, it's good to know them. That is the way through the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra that one manifests enlightenment in that form of embracing a consort, in experiencing and manifesting that appearance of experiencing great bliss. So now, as following up from the last paragraph of the introduction, it said, therefore I will explain birth, death, and intermediate state, the bases purified by the 2 stages of the path. Remember? We talked about that last time. The explanation has 3 parts: the stages of death, the stages of achieving the intermediate state, and the way that a being in the intermediate state takes birth. But actually, it starts with death, doesn't it? It starts with death. So it says, so the actual text begins, during the first aeon, after formation of this world system, the humans of this world had 7 features. So in order to understand the stages of death, it's going about explaining how we are born from the womb, and what's the significance of that. And you can read, the commentary is in smaller print, those of you who have the book, and I'm just reading the root text. You can read the commentary, because that will complement, hopefully, maybe be more extensive than what I say. During the first aeon, after formation of the world system, the humans of this world had 7 features. Spontaneous birth. So, Venerable Sophia, Vajrachetika, You know the Vajracharaka Sutra? Or Mark, you know the Vajracharaka Sutra? You've read? You've read. You might call it the diamond cutter. Yeah, yeah. So in there it mentions four different kinds of rebirth. Do you remember? What are the different ways that an individual can be reborn? In the womb?
Spontaneous.
Spontaneously, that's mentioned here, yeah?
Through heat, moisture.
Through heat and moisture, that's what it said.
And through egg.
Through egg. So womb, egg,
Moisture and heat, and spontaneously. So at the beginning of the eon, the humans of the southern continent, this is called Jambudvipa, right? Or Zambuling in Tibetan. You know when you make the mandala, is it Shara Lupak Pose Lo Zambuling? It's Jambudvipa. So at the beginning of this eon, the humans of Jambudvipa didn't have bodies like we have now, gross bodies. They weren't born from the womb. They had bodies sort of light. They were spontaneously born, first of all. They didn't need a womb to be born in. So that's one of the features that they had, 7 features. They had immeasurable lifespan. That's something you might want to debate about with it. How could they have immeasurable lifespan? All sense faculties in completion. All their sense faculties were complete. So they weren't like some sort of strange creature that we can't imagine. They had bodies pervaded by their own light, or maybe light bodies. They were adorned with similitudes of the major and minor marks of the Buddha. What does that mean? Does anyone have an idea? Carrie, do you know what that means?
They would appear like the major minor marks, but they weren't actually the major minor marks.
Who else has similitudes of the major and minor marks? Do you know? Yeah. The Chakravartin emperors, the wheel-turning kings. Remember when Buddha was born, it wasn't clear, first of all, whether he was going to be a Chakravartin king, because he had these major and minor marks. And it said that the Buddha's major and minor marks are much more complete and prominent than those of a universal monarch. And even at the beginning of the eon, the human beings have them, but not as prominent, not as complete, but still they have similitudes of the major and minor marks. How many major marks are there? Do you know? Venerable? 32. And minor exemplifications? 18? 80. It's close. It sounds the same. So, was that 112, right? So sometimes in the different sadhanas, that's an important number. Anyway, so they have similitudes of the major and minor marks of the Buddha. They are sustained by the food of joy without relying on coarse food. I'm sort of paraphrasing what the actual Tibetan says. Jeffrey Hopkins has translated in a nice, tasty way here. It says, without relying on sort of food that you put in the mouth, that's one of the kinds of food, kase, they eat or consume the food of bliss. So at the beginning, they don't need to eat food. Be nice, huh? But then again, no pizza, no. Whether it'd be nice for you, man. So if they don't eat food, there's no excrement, right? There's no urine. Yeah, that'll come into importance here because as yet there's no gender. At the beginning, there's no gender manifested by the signs, the sexual signs. And they move in the sky through magical power. They can sort of fly around. So these are these 7 features. However, due to the activation, the awakening of imprints, predispositions established by attachment to food in previous lives, at the beginning of this eon, they ate coarse sustenance. Okay, does that make sense? So, do you have attachment to food? I mean, that's one of the reasons when we do nyungne, one of the things that we're abiding in the fast of food and in speech and of mind helps to purify those imprints in our mind that grasp for food in future lifetimes, be born as pretas and so forth. Let me just read you something from Jeffrey Hopkins' text, Meditation on Emptiness. Do you have this, any of you? It's a very good, it's kind of like the Bible. I mean, in terms of talking about meditation on emptiness. So he's talking about the great eon, this eon that we live in, the fortunate eon. It has 1,000 Buddhas will come. This is this great eon. So he explains a little bit how a universe is destroyed through fire and water and air and so forth, and earth and so forth, and then how which of any one world system, when the world system is destroyed, how much of the world system is destroyed? Is only the desire realm destroyed, or is the form realm destroyed? Venerable, do you know? Do you understand the question? Form realm is destroyed? So, actually, the only thing, at first, the desire realm is destroyed, the earth and so forth, but fire and all of this. And then the first concentration is destroyed of the form realm. The second concentration is destroyed. The third concentration, but the fourth concentration is never destroyed. It's not destroyed, but the people eventually that inhabit it, they disappear because their lifespan finally is exhausted. But the fourth one, because the fourth concentration, when you talk about, if you study about there's one very, very interesting text we call Samsuk, the concentrations and formless absorptions. It's one of the subsidiary texts when you study Abhisamayalankara, the perfection of wisdom. And in that it talks about the qualities of the concentrations. The first concentration, second concentration, third. So the fourth concentration is without the faults of inhalation. There's no inhalation. So there's no possibility of it being destroyed by air and so forth. The third concentration is destroyed by wind. The fourth concentration is never destroyed by fire, water, or wind because it is free from the 8 faults of inhalation, exhalation, investigation, analysis, pleasure, pain, mental pleasure, and mental displeasure, sadness. The individual environments of the fourth cease with the death of the beings on which their existence depends. So they're not destroyed, but they disappear when the beings... So essentially, the desire and form realms disappear. When the 20 intermediate eons of formation, because we talk about when a universe comes into existence, there's eons of formation, then an eon of abidance, and an eon of destruction, and an eon of emptiness. When the universe, it disappears. When the 20 intermediate eons of formation in this eon began, the area of the first concentration was formed, and the sentient beings were born there once again. The Buddhists believe that's maybe the basis for the belief in a creator God, because the first being born in the concentration, the Brahma realm, thinks he's there alone, and then other beings are born after him, and he thinks, oh, I created this. I was here before everything else. So who knows, maybe there's some imprint from that brings up this archetypal myth in the Judeo-Christian tradition of the creator God. I mean, there's many other reasons. Thereafter, the 4 abodes of the desire realm gods who inhabit the sky were formed, because above Mount Meru there are 4 other desire realm gods. Our own world, in a system of 1 billion worlds, was formed when a great and powerful blue wind began blowing and circulating in the shape of a half moon. It's nice, these details, blue blue wind. Great rains of 7 types of precious substances fell and formed a vast white round ocean. And eventually we had Mount Meru and the surrounding mountains and the 4 continents and the 8 subcontinents. At first, the land surface was a marvelous substance that someone, through previous conditioning, was led into eating. So here's the connection with this. So we're told a little more detail here about different part. So the first humans were existing during this period. And before they ate, the ground itself, the surface of the land, was a substance. Maybe this, again, maybe there's some legends about this, that one could actually eat. So, what did we say here? However, due to activation of predispositions established by attachment to food in previous lives, they ate coarse sustenance. So that's this substance on the earth. Then when the unrefined part of the food turned into feces and urine, the male and female organs protruded as openings for excretion. 2 beings, two individuals, who possessed predispositions established by copulation in former lives became attached to each other. Probably we've all coupled with one. Jesse, you and I have coupled, we're not talking about just this line, not this line.
I don't want to.
Everyone, now that we're sharing, not this lifetime, but in other lifetimes. All of us, but two individuals maybe who have very strong predispositions, who have had sexual attraction to one another in former lives, they become attached to one another again, and because like, what's falling in love, and in dependence on lying together in copulation, a sentient being is formed in the womb of the female. Through these steps, birth from a womb came to be. So just some other detail at that time. You've probably read some of this before, heard some of this before, right? At first, the land surface was a marvelous substance that someone through previous conditioning was led into eating. Until that time, their spontaneously produced bodies had no anus or genitals. For the sake of excretion, these now appeared. Gradually, the marvelous radiance of the beings degenerated, and the earth became hard with a corn-like plant growing in abundance. So first they ate the sustenance, the substance of the earth, and then later plants began to grow spontaneously without cultivation, like in which continent is there harvest without cultivation? One of the continents, we say, the unharvested, or uncultivated harvest, northern continent. So like that. And the earth became hard with a corn-like plant growing in abundance. Some, however, were not satisfied by merely taking their portion day by day, and some began hoarding. It's like there was always enough. You would take some, and the next day something would grow. But some people were not satisfied with that, so they took a couple extra and they put in their, wherever they were staying. Some began stealing. So this is how also the various negative actions began. So they would steal from others because now there were possessions. Houses were built, abodes were built to hide the sexual act out of embarrassment. Gradually, the sins were committed and the causes of birth in the bad migrations were made. The 20 eons of formation were finished with the formation of the birthplaces for animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings. The lifespan of humans, which at that time was extremely long, gradually began to shorten, and when it was 40,000 eons, the first of the 1,000 Buddhas of this great eon, Krakuchanda, is that pronounced right? Krakuchanda? The first Buddha appeared. Shakyamuni is the fourth, right? When the average lifespan was 30,000 years, the second Buddha, Kanaka Muni, appeared. At 20,000 year lifespan, the third Buddha, Kashyapya, who is not the Kashyapya who was one of the disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha, has the same name but different, he was born. And when the average lifespan was only 100 years, the very length of which reflects the poor state of the world, the heroic Shakyamuni, already a Buddha, appeared simultaneously in all 1 billion worlds of this world system to show the way to enlightenment. His teaching will remain for 5,000 years. Eventually, the human lifespan will degenerate to an average of 10 years, accompanied by destruction of the beings, but not the environment, destruction by either weapons, sickness, or starvation, the current intermediate eon ending with the destruction by weapons, and the remaining beings will experience renunciation, whereupon emanations of Buddha will appear to lead them on the path of virtue. So it's said that at that point Maitreya will come, not as a universal teacher, but you've heard before, everyone else will be maybe this tall, and Maitreya will be this tall, and everyone will say, wow, why are you so tall? How did you become so tall? And he will say, I've practiced abstention from the 10 non-virtuous paths of action. That will be his main teaching when the lifespan is 10. And he will appear later when the lifespan gets up to 80,000 years again. He will appear as a universal teacher like Shakyamuni. So it'll be a long time yet. But he appears in various guises now and then. So this is talking about birth from the womb, how birth from the womb came about. Humans at the beginning of the eon had light-like bodies, and it was due to the imprints of actions that we create now that first they ate food, sexual organs were created, and then the imprints of sexual desire gave rise to copulation and birth from the womb. So womb-born humans of this world are said to have 6 constituents, 6 special qualities. They are either earth, water, fire, wind, the 4 elements, channels and drops, or, from another point of view, bone, marrow, and semen obtained from the father, and flesh, skin, and blood, or the ovum, obtained from the mother. So it's said that these 6 substances that human beings, womb-born human beings possess, besides the fact that we have the intellect of a human being, are the prerequisites to be able to practice Highest Yoga Tantra. It's not possible to practice Highest Yoga Tantra in the God realm, in general. You don't have that. There may be some special exceptions, because they don't have a body that has these same kind of constituents. They can practice the lower tantras. Whoever is a person definite to become enlightened in one short lifetime of this degenerate era, through practicing from the beginning the path of Highest Yoga Tantra or mantra, is necessarily such a womb-born human of this world, that means the southern continent, having the 6 constituents. So what do you think? Have you heard that before? When you heard about Tantra? Did you hear that? So many times in the tantric sadhanas, they mention this is one of the special features. When we're meditating on perfect human rebirth, you can think, I have a human body in the southern continent with these 6 constituents, which allow me. I have the ability to practice Highest Yoga Tantra, Highest Yoga Mantra, and thereby achieve enlightenment. How long does it take to achieve enlightenment by the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra? Does anyone know? Is there a set time? at most 16 lives. I think at most infinite lives. I mean, it depends on if you're practicing. If you keep all your vows, maybe 16 lives or something like that. But how about at least? Well, it's said that through the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra, you can achieve enlightenment say, for instance, an individual who goes into retreat, who has not yet entered the path of accumulation. This is what's meant by achieving enlightenment in one short lifetime. It means the person is not yet on the path. They don't yet really have spontaneous bodhicitta, nor spontaneous renunciation. They don't yet have realization of emptiness. But they understand them correctly. They have an accumulation of merit, maybe by doing the preparations, preparatory practices, or through the practice of guru devotion, or many lifetimes of practice, imprints. So if they enter into retreat during the course of 3 years, 3 months, and 3 half cycles of the moon, there's another 1.5 months. Sometimes they say 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, right? Have you heard that? Usually, it actually, in the sadhanas that we're familiar with, it usually says 3 years, 3 months, and 3 half cycles of the moon. It's another 1.5, pardon? 3 fortnights. Thank you. That it is possible to accumulate the merit necessary and achieve all the stages of the generation and completion stage. So even in some of the tantras, it's said that, what have they thought, the 6 yogas of Niguma and others, they say that you can achieve in 3 days. I don't know about that. Maybe there's some, if you have some imprints, some special imprints. But in general, we say it is possible, and there are beings today who have that kind of experience. His Holiness has said, Lama Yeshe used to say, especially we have that knowledge in the Gelugpa tradition, how it's possible to achieve enlightenment in a very short period of time. In the lower tantras, it's not possible to achieve enlightenment in such a short period of time. It is possible to achieve, they say, according to the tantras, the lower tantras, it's possible to achieve enlightenment in one lifetime, but they mean one lifetime that's elongated through the practice of long life practices. Okay, so it's only through Highest Yoga Tantra that you can achieve this. And in order to in one very short lifetime of this degenerate age, go off, Thea could go off, do retreat, 3 years, 3 months later. Tian.
Something special about being born at a degenerate age that helps us on our path?
In general, you might say that it's a pretty bad time to be reborn, without looking closely. On the other hand, it's said that if one is skillful, there is more chance of developing compassion at a time like this. Just look at the state of the world, the state of America. There's more chance of, because there are so many obstacles, there is more, what we say, grist for the mill, and so there is more opportunity and necessity to be alert and to practice the training of the mind. Also, it's said that in the time of the Buddha, there was immense merit accumulated by keeping the vows of a fully ordained monk for an entire lifetime. It's said that in this degenerate era, that an equivalent amount of merit is accumulated by keeping one vow for 1 day. So in other words, I was going to say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but it's something like that. When the going gets tough, there's more merit accrued. It's just as though when we take precepts, if we take precepts on full moon and new moon, when the mind it has the tendency to be uncontrolled and loony, you accumulate more merit on those days than if you were to do take precepts on just some other day. So in a sense, by practicing as much as we can at this time, we actually are creating an immense amount of merit and imprints, because we have to, it's in the time when everything is easy. Buddha's there, there are benefactors supplying the viharas, and everyone is praising you and saying nice things to you. Of course they practiced because the Buddha was there, but there wasn't the same kind of, situation going on. So there is some benefit to being born at a time like this. Now you might say, after this lifetime, I'm fed up. I want to go to Canada. So one of our students sent me an email that she's planning on going to Canada. Those of you who are watching this DVD somewhere in the unknown future, this was a couple of days after the election of 2004, when George Bush was reelected. And so some of you might feel, after this lifetime, I've had it. I'm going to the Pure Land. Right? Would that be a good idea? What? Canada. No, I'm not saying Canada's a Pure Land. I'm going to the Pure. I'm talking about this after this life. You might try, because that's supposed to be a very special place where one can achieve enlightenment without obstacles. But it said that if you're born in the Pure Land, Bodhisattva born in the Pure Land, indeed they can make progress, but the progress is slower than it would be if they were born as a human in the southern continent. The reason is that there's not as many causes of renunciation. Pure Land isn't, the delusions don't rise. You don't have, as prominently, you don't have to apply the antidotes as assiduously. You do receive teachings and, so forth. So the Bodhisattvas, it said that sometimes the Bodhisattvas, when they pass away from earth, they may maybe take rebirth in the Pure Land for a short vacation, a little sojourn. It's a, I just see, it's in a little raft floating in the pool, and what do they call, pina colada or something? Margarita, the Pure Land. I'm joking, excuse me, and then they take rebirth in the southern continent again, because being born here, there's more chance to develop compassion, renunciation, and so forth. So they may be born there to actually take teachings from the Buddhas that reside and be inspired, and then they come back. Okay? So whoever is a person who is definite to become enlightened in one short lifetime of this degenerate era through practicing from the beginning, that means they have not yet entered the path of accumulation, have not actualized the generation stage, like ourselves. From the beginning, the path of highest yoga mantra is necessarily such a womb-born human of this world having the 6 constituents. Yep.
Why is that so? Why do we have to have this kind of a body to practice Tantra?
Well, it's coming, but
Okay. All right.
Basically, you want to cut to the chase, right? But it has to do with the fact that in this meditation that is done in Highest Yoga Tantra, we utilize these features of the body, the nadis. You notice in the first 6 we talked about fire, water, air, or earth and air and so forth, 4 elements. The nadis or channels. What else are they called? Meridians? What are they called in Chinese, Venerable? What is it? Mai? Man. Mine. Mine. This is mine. And wind is called, the wind energy is called chi. Chi. So those are the same things that we're talking about. So having these channels, or sometimes you read in acupuncture, sometimes in the West they call them meridians. They're not the blood vessels, although those are nadis in a sense. When we're talking about the nadis here, or Tibetan, we say tsa. The tsa, like we talk sa lung meditation. That means meditation on the nadis and the wind. And also we have these elements within the nadis, the bindu, or drops. So womb-born, at the top of page 30, is your laid out the same way as the top of page 30? Okay, same. Womb-born humans of this world are said to have the 6 constituents: earth, water, fire, wind, channels, and drops. So notice wind, channels, and drops. Those are the 3 particularly that are utilized in the highest yoga mantra meditations of the completion stage. So through the drops, we're able to generate a particular kind of bliss that will remain within that subtle mind. The wind, manipulating the wind in particular channel, the central channel, we can cause the most subtle mind to activate. And by training in that way again and again in meditation, we can train that subtlemost mind to realize emptiness. So that's not something that can be done with other kinds of bodies. So that it has to do with this body that has those particular kind of features. So I'll just read a little of the commentary here. A special feature of highest yoga mantra, which here is the same as saying tantra, right? That highest yoga tantra, that distinguishes it from the 3 lower tantras, action, performance, and yoga tantras, and from the sutra vehicle, is that through practicing it, highly qualified persons can attain Buddhahood in one lifetime. This means that they pass over the 5 paths, the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning, in one lifetime without having to practice for innumerable eons as required by other systems. You might say, this is the one for me. I think I've mentioned before, I remember at Kopan in the 70s, one of the most popular books in the bookstore. You know, there were all these great books of how to practice, not as many as we have now, but there were a lot in there. But the most popular one was Enlightenment for the Lazy Man. As though, you know, like, how to, you know. We always want to do it. So that's not the proper motivation. The proper motivation is to be motivated by even greater compassion than the bodhisattvas have, and not being, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche mentions again and again, not feeling comfortable just to take one's time achieving enlightenment, because many, many people depend upon us that are suffering, depend upon our achieving enlightenment for their eventual achievement and enlightenment, for their being led along the path. So that kind of motivation, wanting to achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible, one enters into this practice. In the other systems, Sutra and the lower tantras, a great length of time is spent in amassing the meritorious power needed to empower the wisdom consciousness that realizes emptiness so that it can overcome the obstructions to omniscience. In other words, even we've realized emptiness directly, that's not sufficient. That's sufficient to eliminate the obstructions to liberation, right? The delusions. Do you remember this, Tenzin? The two kinds of obstructions? There are what we call the obstructions to liberation that the arhats eliminate through realizing emptiness, and they escape from samsara. They achieve nirvana. But they don't eliminate the more subtle obstruction called the obstruction to omniscience, or to all-knowing. That can only be eliminated, ceased, through the simultaneous, through the meditation on emptiness, supported by a mind of bodhicitta, which has accumulated merit for a great amount of time. So that's how it's usually done in the lower tantras, and in the bodhisattva path, accumulation of merit over a great period of time. And in the lower tantras, one does achieves all sorts of psychic powers in order to create more merit. However, in the highest yoga mantra, special practices are used to enhance the wisdom consciousness through utilizing subtle minds in the realization of emptiness and in subsequently rising in an illusory body. Those of you who received the teachings from Kirti Senshab Rinpoche the last couple of years remember the explanation of the illusory body. These teachings depend upon the channels, winds, and drops within the human body. the bodies of humans of this world, now we're back to the root text, this is the actual text itself. The bodies of the humans of this world have 72,000 nadis, or channels, as well as the right, left, and central channels. Venerable, in Chinese acupuncture, or not talking about Chinese Buddhism, do they talk about, in acupuncture, do they talk about 72,000 channels or some different number?
No, not so many.
No?
There's, let's see, there's 12 main channels, 8 extra channels, and the 12 main channels have 4 paths in each of the channels.
So there's just
A smaller number. So here we're talking about many, many more subtle channels within the body, within which the wind element that supports consciousness move, the various kinds of consciousness. So sometimes that also comes up, the 72,000 nadis. What one has to try to do is to bring all of the wind element from those channels to the central channel in order to activate the most subtle mind to achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. So it's a matter of withdrawing them all down. So this is a lot of good questions for examination here. Huh? How many channels are there in the body? How did tell the story of how the womb-born humans were born? So, at the time of death, all the winds in the 72,000 channels gather in the right and left channels. Then the winds in these 2 channels dissolve into the central channel. We'll be talking about that much in this next couple of days. The winds in the upper and lower parts of the central channel then finally dissolve into the indestructible, life-bearing wind at the heart. So it's then that one has the experience of the clear light of death. Should we take a little break? I'll put this little thing about Labab Duchen you can read, and we'll start again in a couple of minutes. Any questions? How are we doing? Carla, do you have any? Venerable, do you have any questions? No? Dave, you okay? So I better take another one. So we've been talking about the process, the necessity of having a body born from a womb that has these 6 special substances. So there's 2 ways. It also is mentioned in the tantras also. That usually it mentions either, mentions both sets, the 4 elements, including wind, the nadis, and the bindu. So usually the wind, the nadis, and the bindu are predominant there for the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra. Or these 3 substances from the father, the bone, the marrow, and the seminal fluid, and the 3 substances from the mother, the flesh, the blood, and the flesh, the skin, the flesh, and the ovum or blood. So we talked about how the humans arose to have womb-born rebirth, and how the bodies of one that's going to achieve enlightenment through the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra has to be such a body as this, and how it has 72,000 nadis, as well as the right and left and central channel. So the central channel is called what? Do you know the names of the central channel? Avaduti. What is it in Tibetan? Uma. So there's a very interesting, Uma Thurman? So some people think she's named after the goddess Uma. There's a Hindu goddess.
Shiva's consort.
Right? Is it who's that? Is it what was that boy's name? You said you study Hinduism.
Oh, yes. Uma actually don't go. And, one of the consorts of Shiva. Shiva's second main consort.
second ring, huh? Okay.
So, but Uma in Tibetan, that's a Sanskrit word, but in Tibetan, U means center, Uma means the central one. So it means both the Madhyamaka, the middle way, or the central way, and it also refers to this Avaduti, the central channel. That's how we say it in Tibetan, Uma, Sa Uma. So the Sanskrit name is Avaduti. So the central channel begins at the brow, sort of like what people call the third eye. So there's some reason for that. It actually is a place where the central channel has an opening, and that central channel then goes above the brain, below the skull, up to the top of the crown, and then down, paralleling the spine, a little bit in front of the spine, but very close to the back, through the throat, where there's a chakra, the crown chakra, the throat chakra, at the heart, another chakra, the navel chakra, and then to the bottom of the spine, where they call the chakra of the secret place, and then even more detail. The right and left channels that are being referred to here that are very prominent in this kind of practice begin at the nostrils, the right and left nostrils. So what is it, Dorji? The left channel is in the right nostril? No. The right channel begins at the right nostril, and they run somewhat parallel. They join the central channel. They're very close to the central channel when they reach the brow, and they parallel it, and at various points they embrace it, so to speak. They have knots around it that cause the constriction of energy within the central channel. So generally, the air, the wind element within our body does not flow easily within the central channel because of the fact that our conceptual mind mainly rides on these winds within the 72,000 nadis, other than the 3 nadis, and mainly through the right and left channels, the right and left nadis. It's only when the air gets into the central channel that you can have a subtle non-conceptual mind. So this is what's being referred to here. At the time of death, all the winds in the 72,000 channels gather in the right and left channels, first of all. Then the winds in these two dissolve into the central channel. So usually it's said that some of the winds enter into the crown chakra, some of them enter into the navel, and it's through that process that slowly those two, the air that's centered in those places then descends and ascends to the heart chakra. The winds in the upper and lower parts of the central channel finally dissolve into the indestructible, life-bearing wind at the heart. So what's the indestructible, life-bearing wind? How could it be indestructible? Do you know, Johnny?
I'm not sure. I've heard it's indestructible drop. Is that something different?
There's the indestructible drop, which is actual elements, right? Bindu. And then there's the indestructible wind that's within that drop. Indestructible in the sense that it abides until, from lifetime to lifetime. It is not destroyed at the end of this lifetime. Let's see what the commentary says here. At the heart is a channel wheel. That means a chakra with 8 petals or spokes. So sometimes they do use the word in the text. They say spokes, just like a wheel has spokes coming from the very center. Sometimes they use the word petals, like a lotus, because sometimes the chakras have a shape, sometimes facing up, sometimes facing down, kind of like the way that petals face. So both words are used. It is called the wheel of phenomena. That is the heart chakra, the chakra of phenomena, because the indestructible drop, which is the basis of the very subtle wind and mind that are the root of phenomena, abides at the heart. This very subtle drop. At the throat is the wheel of enjoyment. The throat chakra is called the enjoyment chakra. It has 16 petals and is so called because the throat is the place of enjoying the 6 tastes. You know the 6 tastes? Sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, hot, and salty. So when you make offerings to the gurus, you can think, to the merit fields, you can think, when you offer food, you can offer all different kinds of food. You can think of offering all the different tastes. So, sweet foods and sour foods. What's sweet and sour also, maybe? sweet and sour pork or something, and bitter, astringent, hot, and salty. You can offer all of those. So the throat chakra is called the enjoyment chakra because it is the source at which the place of enjoying the six tastes. At the crown is the wheel of great bliss. It has 32 petals and is so called because the white bodhicitta, or mind of enlightenment, which is the basis of bliss, dwells at the top of the head. So when we talked about the bindu, we mentioned bindu earlier. We said one way of counting the 6 elements was the 4 elements, ending with, let's say, wind, and then the nadis and the bindu, or drops. So what are those drops? It's not like these cough drops that I'm eating. This word bindu is a Sanskrit word. Sometimes when you see the letter hung and others, there's a little circle at the top. They call that the bindu. Sometimes. So bindu means drop, and within our body there are elements which are conducive, two different kinds of elements that are conducive to the generation of bliss. And one of them has a whitish tint, the other has a reddish tint. They're called the white and red elements. The white element is also called the white bodhicitta. And the red element is called the red, what? Shunyata? No, the red bodhicitta. It's called bodhicitta. Why are they called bodhicitta? Do you know, Diana? Is bodhicitta what we know when we studied about the mind? Bodhicitta is a substance? Because these things are substances. Bodhicitta is a special primary mind, right? So they're given the name bodhicitta. His Holiness in a commentary to the Kala Chakra mentioned, probably from some other commentaries, that there's a reasoning for that. They help to, through their activation and the generation of bliss that results through bringing them, causing them to become mobile, and especially causing them to enter into the central channel where the subtle mind can experience that bliss, that acts as an aid to prevent one from falling into the extreme of one's own nirvana, one's own self-interest. That kind of bliss is so satisfying that one can continue to abide like that and work for sentient beings. So it has the same function as the mind of enlightenment. Anyway, if you have the book on the Kala Chakra by Jeffrey Hopkins, you can, I think His Holiness mentions in there about the etymology of why the drops are called bodhicitta. They're not actually, bodhicitta is what we usually mean, because as Diana said, that's a mind, and these are physical substances. Yeah.
Indestructible life-bearing wind and the indestructible drop, by their nature being indestructible, are we to understand that they're not subject to the law of impermanence?
No, we're not to understand that they're not subject to the law of impermanence. They are impermanent. Everything, they're indestructible in that, let's say, for instance, remember there are some things that are eternal but still impermanent, such as the mind. Our mind stream now, our subtle mind and wind, are eternal in that they will continue on. They are not subject to a gross ceasing, so that some, like you're just fed up with someone and you kill them. You could kill someone's mind stream. It can't be, it is not possible to do that. So they're indestructible in that sense. They are impermanent. They change moment by moment, but they're not destroyed like other kinds of things that have a certain period in which they exist.
And are they connected to the mind? I mean, is it this indestructible wind? it's a part of the mind. It travels with
So-
the mind. It doesn't.
We'll go into all this detail, but just very briefly, all minds, all conscious phenomena are themselves formless. That's one of the qualities of mind. It is that which is clear and knowing. And the meaning of clarity here, one of the meanings for sure, is that it is non-obstructive. It is not material. So when we talk about impermanent phenomena, we talk about matter, mind, and even a third category, which is neither matter or mind, like the person, other kinds of time and other things. But mind is of a different continuum than matter. But all minds are intrinsically related with a mount that causes their ability to move to objects. That's their mounted wind, or what is the we say prana, Sanskrit word prana, or chi. So even the subtlemost mind, which is going to continue on to the next life and all the way to Buddhahood, that has its own mounted wind. So that indestructible wind and the mind with which it is inseparable. It's never possible for the sort of like the mind is asleep so the wind goes out and has a hamburger or something like that. You know, it doesn't happen. They're inseparable. Okay? So within the central channel at the heart chakra is this subtlemost mind and the subtlemost wind. Okay, they reside within two substances that came about from this lifetime, the white and red bodhicitta of this lifetime, from mother's ovum and father's sperm. And some remnant of those still abide within the central channel of our heart. So anyway, there's more detail coming, but let's just try to do this in a systematic way. Otherwise, we'll go, oh, I want to know about this, I want to know about that. So we told why the crown chakra was called the wheel, the wheel of bliss, because it's there. That's the main. It's not that's the only place that there's a white bodhicitta, the white bindu. That's one of the main sources of it. The main places is it abide. So when you think of Oma Hung, you know the letters Oma Hung? What's the crown color? White, because that's where the white bodhicitta is. The throat is what color? Red, because there's red bodhicitta there, but that's not the main only source, also the navel chakra. And the heart is blue because blue represents the mind and the wind element. That's the main source of the subtle mind. At the navel is the wheel of emanation, which has 64 petals and is so called because the fierce one, which is Tumo, you know Tumo? So what's the gentleman's name who's lying on the floor there? Seth. Awake, but lying, but awake. So you were asking in the break about Kundalini. So in Buddhism, there are different ways of giving rise to this blissful experience in a controlled way, unlike in some of the Hindu tantras, which seem to be the rising of the Kundalini depends upon a lot of different conditions that one doesn't always have control over. Sometimes time, blessings, one's own exertion, or so forth, and is not always controllable. Whereas here, one of the special ways of giving rise to this blissful experience is by utilizing the element at the navel chakra, the red element there, which is called Tumo, and which is what? Chandika, I think, right? Is that right? Tumo, Chandika? Let's check. That means the fierce one. And it's that can blaze. You can actually, by doing the vase meditation and so forth, you've heard of the vase-like meditation, you can meditate on that tumo, or the fierce one, cause it to not only to have its intrinsic warmth, but to actually heat up, and that heat to rise within the central channel to melt the white bodhicitta at the crown chakra and systematically experience the bliss as that descends down the central channel. So in a very systematic way, in a very controlled way that can be reproduced again and again. So at the navel is the wheel of emanation, which has 64 petals. One of the special reasons also that one meditates there is that the wind can enter into the navel chakra much more readily, as there are many doorways, 64 entrances to it there. It is called the fierce one, which is it's called the wheel of emanation, and is so called because Tumo, or the fierce one, which is the emanator of great bliss, abides at the navel. So this is information you don't ordinarily find in many places, why they're called those names. Like wheel of emanation, you might think it's because you emanate out from that, or there are other reasons also. But it is called it is a place of Tumo which emanates great bliss. At the secret region, which I'm not going to tell you about, secret. No, I tell you. At the base of the spine, it doesn't mean at the base of the spine, it means on the central channel, at the level of the base of the spine, is the wheel of sustaining bliss, which has 32 petals, and is so called because the innate bliss is mainly sustained from the secret region. Okay, we'll just leave that for there. So we'll go back to the root text. The white and red constituents, or white and red bodhicitta, these drops, exist in the manner of a closed, round case with a white drop on top and a red one on the bottom inside the central channel at the chakra of the heart. That is not the only place they exist. That's one place they exist. In the center of this closed case is the one entity of the very subtle wind and mind. So at the time of death, when the subtle mind actually leaves the body, these two drops that sort of like if you think of a little sphere, half of which is white, half of which is red. Right? Which one is on top? Which color? What? You said red. What does the text say? Who said red? You said red, right? What? White drop on top. Because it's come, in essence, like the white drop up here and the red drop here. The bottom is red. So at the time of death, when the mind leaves, these merge through one another, and the red fluid comes up out the nostril, and the white fluid comes out through the sexual organ. So it's said to be one sign of the final sign of death, that at the male organ, for instance, or the female organ, there will be, not only will the body look a little bit different, but there will be some fluid leaving, and from both the nostrils and the sexual organ. So that's kind of a sign that definitely the mind has left, the subtle mind has left the body. When those white and red drops that surround the subtle mind and wind leave. The very subtle wind is the indestructible life-bearing wind into which the final dissolution in the process of death occurs. Death occurs in this way because, except for this very subtle wind, if the slightest wind that acts as a basis of consciousness dwells in any part of the body, death is not possible. So you might think, okay, I just have to keep thinking. I won't die. But at the time of death, the wind's absorbed due to karma. You don't have any choice. Just like when you get tired, even when when you're a little kid, you want to stay awake. Or even now you want to stay awake in class. Like, hey, Eric, you want to stay awake, right? But starting to fall asleep. Okay? So now let's talk about the stages of dissolution. So we talk about the dissolution of the 25 gross objects. Here it says, humans must die by way of dissolution of the 25 gross objects. 5 aggregates, 5 constituents, 6 sources, 5 objects, and 5 basic wisdoms. So this is very, very useful if you do meditation of any tantric sadhana. Also, if you do the meditation in the Lan Rim, which is a substitute for the 9-round meditation on death, to actually imagine the death evolution. When we talk about a dissolution here, say a dissolution of the elements, we say the what's the first element that absorbs? Do you know from other places? The earth element absorbs into the water element. So you might think at first it sounds like some dirt is put into some water and dissolves in or something like that. The meaning here, dissolve, is not like that. What it means is that the solidity of our body, sort of like when one is very healthy and there is a preponderance of earth element within one's body, one doesn't look emaciated. You know, at the time of death, have you seen someone near to death and then just actually after they die, their body looks very shrunken and everything, all of the skin and under the eyes and everything. So this is a sign that the earth element has absorbed. It has to do with the solidity of the body. So the air element, which acts as the mount of that earth, it's absorbing in such a way that the earth element is no longer predominant, but the water element has a predominance. That's what's meant by the earth element absorbing into water. It doesn't mean that, you know, there's some water and the earth goes into it. Do you follow what I'm saying? So there's that terminology might be misleading otherwise. Then the water element, the fluidity of the body, the moisture of the body begins to dry up. It doesn't mean that suddenly one no longer has blood, right? But the saliva in the mouth does not appear as rapidly. The nostrils dry out. The eyes no longer have as much lubrication fluid and so forth. As the air that supports the moisture element, the water element, it begins to lose its ability to stay out. It's absorbing due to karma or due to meditation. And that's said to absorb into what element? Into the fire element. Not because the water is going into the fire, but in that the fire element now becomes predominant. That's what it's meant by that. The fire element has to do with the warmth or heat of the body, especially digestion depends upon heat and the heat of the body. Remember we mentioned last time, at the time of death, the heat of someone who is going to be born in the upper realms leaves where first? Okay, you did say a different thing than everyone else. He says the head, you say the feet. Now who's right this time? You say the head? What does the text say? See, if someone's going to be born in the upper realms, where does the heat leave first? We have two different answers. So you're just saying, check the book now. Just quote it to me now. It says in the text, right? And we have two different answers. Both are very adamant that they're right. Jesse's not adamant? You're right, but you're not adamant. Okay. So you say it goes from where? If you're going to be born in the upper realm, it goes from the feet first, you say. What does the text say? It was in his, well, it's somewhere in the text, but it's also in His Holiness's foreword, right?
Page 9 in the foreword.
Which, near the bottom or where?
At the bottom, the last paragraph.
For those strongly involved in non-virtuous actions, the warmth of the body withdraws first from the upper part of the body and then from the other parts. Whereas for those strongly involved in virtuous actions, the warmth first withdraws from the feet. So what did you say? Feet? Yeah, naturally. So he's right. Well, here, like say for instance, if you're with someone who's dying, and you touch their feet or their forehead, at one point, one of the, like say someone who's going to be born in the upper realm, the warmth will start to leave the feet. No, it'll go up to the heart and then go down here. Whereas the person who is going to be born in the lower realms, the heat leaves the head. The head gets cold first, the feet are still warm, comes to the heart, and then the heat comes up. So this has to do with the absorbing of the fire element, the digestion stops and other things, and the air element becomes predominant. Then the air element absorbs and other things happen. The tongue and tactile consciousnesses absorb and the tongue becomes thick. The breathing stops completely. And the person looks, to all intents and purposes, as though they're dead, but they are, some subtle processes continue. So these are the things that we're talking about here. We talk about the dissolution of the 25 gross objects. So the process of death occurs in 8 stages. These 25 things, gross objects, absorb over 8 stages that involve the dissolution of the 25 factors. 22 of those 25 dissolve over the first 4 stages of the 4 elements, and the remaining, the aggregate of consciousness, the mental sense, and the basic wisdom realizing the nature of phenomena, dissolving over the last 4. So let's see what this is talking about. First, dissolution. Initially, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of forms dissolve simultaneously. So if you're familiar also with the Guhya Samaja sadhana, there's all of these are, all of the different elements and sources and so forth have corresponding deities that at the time of going to sleep or death, one meditates on their dissolution one after another. So initially, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of forms dissolve simultaneously. So they are, this is on the level of the aggregate of form, that means that are related with the form aggregate. So first, the form aggregate absorbs. What does that mean? You have a form aggregate, right? Right? When you die and you're not yet, the subtle mind is not yet left, don't you still have a form aggregate? What does it mean that the form aggregate absorbs?
Isn't that referring to the earth element?
Well, that's one of the other things on the level of the form aggregate. The aggregate of form, the basic mirror-like wisdom, we'll see as we talk about it. The basic mirror-like wisdom is associated with that. So at this first level, when the earth element is absorbing, because it says the earth constituent or earth element, when the earth element absorbs and the body begins to look a little bit shallow, the color changes and so forth, at that time, the aggregate of form does no longer have the same quality that it had previously. And one of the 5 wisdoms, pristine wisdoms that we have now that can be transformed into the 5 kinds of Buddha wisdoms, that absorbs the mirror-like wisdom. What is the mirror-like wisdom? Do you know? Have you heard? Mark number 2, Mark number 1. You're Mark number 2. He's Mark number. Maybe you're Mark White and Mark Brown. Mark the dark. The mirror-like wisdom, this is absorbing at the time that the earth element and the form aggregate absorb. So we'll see. We'll keep that in mind. This is something you should try to understand. The eye sense, that is the eye faculty, and the visual forms included within one's own continuum. So that would mean, for instance, that let's say, for instance, when one looks very healthy, you have rosy cheeks. I don't have rosy cheeks, or, a nice complexion. At the time of death, the visual, certain visual forms, it's not like you become invisible, but certain visual forms absorb when a person is very, very sick, also, they don't have that same kind of vibrancy of color and so forth, complexion, right? You think not? They do? Okay. As the external sign of the dissolution of the form aggregate, one's limbs become smaller than before, and one's body becomes weak and powerless. So this would be taking place at the time of death. This would be a near sign of death, when the body starts to look a little bit more emaciated and the limbs are no longer, one doesn't have the power to move the limbs as one wishes. The diminishment in size and strength is a pronounced form of that usually associated with old age. So this is the diminishing of the body and weakening of the limbs in old age is kind of called a distant sign of death. Also, when your eyes start getting, like mine, start getting unclear and you don't have the same potency, this because the eye sense power is going to absorb at the time of death. This is a distant sign of death. The close sign of death is that it completely absorbs and you can't see the forms any longer. The basic mirror-like wisdom is explained to be an ordinary consciousness. So this is important, the basic mirror-like wisdom. Remember the mirror-like wisdom of the basic state where we are now. Because the mirror-like wisdom in Tantra, we can be talking about the mirror-like wisdom that transforms into the Buddha's mirror-like wisdom. The basic mirror-like wisdom is explained to be an ordinary consciousness to which many objects appear simultaneously and clearly, just as reflections appear in a mirror. So if you think of, in some of the initiations, a mirror is held up. This is representing the mirror-like wisdom. Okay? As an external sign of its dissolution, one's sight becomes unclear and dark. An external sign of the dissolution of the earth constituent, or the earth element, is that the body becomes very thin, the limbs loose, and one has the sense that the body is sinking under the earth. So sometimes people, it depends on their karma, sometimes people that are in great fear and negative karma is ripening to impel them into the lower realms, there's a feeling of being pressed down as the earth element is absorbing. As it is mentioned here, what does it say? Hold me up? Is in the commentary. The impression of sinking is such that one calls out, hold me up. An external sign of the dissolution of the eye sense power is that one cannot open or close the eyes. As an external sign of the dissolution of the visible forms included within one's continuum, the luster of one's body diminishes and one's strength is consumed. The internal sign, so those are all external signs that others can notice that the earth element has absorbed, the form aggregate is absorbed, the mirror-like wisdom is absorbed, the eye sense power is absorbed. They can notice this. The internal sign that you as a meditator would notice is the arising of a bluish appearance called mirage-like, the mirage-like appearance. It is like the appearance of water when the light of the sun strikes a desert in the summer, a mirage. The appearance, wavering appearance, kind of bluish. He mentions it's sometimes compared to a massive smoke, but generally it's referred to mirage. So when we talk about the mirage, when we do meditation on death, this kind of meditation on the absorption of the 25 elements. So how many things, of these 25 gross elements, gross things, how many absorbed at the first stage here? It's 5, right? So in each case, for the first several ones, there's an aggregate, a wisdom, what? An element, a sense, and pardon? Some other, some external object, phenomena such as the objects of the senses, your internal objects. So at that time, you can meditate, first of all, when I die, say, imagine yourself in bed or in your meditation cushion or lying in the lion-like posture. Final death is occurring. The earth element is absorbing now. Okay, the air that supports that. The body is becoming more emaciated looking. The ability to open and close the eyes is lost. The ability to see as the mirror-like wisdom absorbs is going. Things don't, you can maybe still make out some things, but they're no longer clear. It's not as though, right now as you open your eyes, you can see everything together, right? The time of death as the wisdom, mirror-like wisdom absorbed, things don't have that same clarity. There might be still some light, but you don't have the ability to see things clearly like that any longer. The body becomes weak, and within one's mental consciousness, if you pay attention, if you're not fearful and you pay attention to what's happening, irregardless of what you imagine, there will be the appearance to your mental consciousness of a wavering mirage. So this is what one meditates on at that point. You think, now my body is becoming weak, I'm getting closer to death. This process is irreversible now. My body, I can no longer open my eyes, I can't see. But if I pay attention to my mental consciousness, I can see this, I can notice within the mind, within the clarity of the mind, there is, because of the dissolution of the winds that support the earth element and so forth, there is this appearance of mirage. Okay, that's the internal sign. Others can't notice that. It's not as though if they look at you when you're dying, they see a mirage or something. That's the internal sign. Other signs are those that are observed by other people that can see you. Capito? Okay. So the second dissolution. So there were 5 things there. Now there are 5 things in the second dissolution. After that, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of feelings dissolve simultaneously. Okay, so the feeling aggregate absorbs. When the aggregate of feelings dissolve, the external sign is that the body consciousness can no longer experience the pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings which accompany the sense consciousness. Notice it says the body consciousness. You can still have mental consciousness that experiences pleasure, pain, and indifference. But at this point, if someone were to take a pin and stick in your toe, you would not be able to feel that, to distinguish whether that's pleasurable or you might think that they're patting your toe. There's no differentiation. When the aggregate of feeling absorbs. So that's talking about the body consciousness. The wisdom, the basic wisdom, the wisdom of the basic state of equality absorbs. So what's the wisdom of equality? That's explained to be an ordinary consciousness that is mindful of pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings as being of one type, that is to say, a feeling. In other words, on the basic state, our level, the wisdom of equality is one that recognizes feelings as feelings, whether they be pleasurable, unpleasant, or neutral. It is also described as a consciousness that is mindful of many synonyms as having one meaning. Can also mean on that level. Does that make sense? Many synonyms. What are synonyms? Can you think of 2 things there, Sina?
They mean the same thing?
Yeah, but they have different words, right? What are 2? Give a couple of synonyms. Can you think of some synonyms? Dog and canine. So the wisdom that knows that they are equivalent, that they are equal. Okay. Okay, they're not. Okay. Good.
Canine is more encompassing than dog. Wolves can be canine. That's not a dog.
Okay, good. So what are, then you have to give, that's good. No, that's good. Can you give 2 synonyms?
Cat and feline. No, that doesn't work.
Okay, so you have to think about who can think of some synonyms. Venerable, can you think of some synonyms back there?
What is it?
Same and similar, she said.
Same and similar. Same and similar are not synonyms. They're similar. They're not the same. How about male and man? No? They're not synonyms? Okay, in certain contexts, things are synonymous. In certain contexts, if two words, if you look in the dictionary, two words can have, any word can have several different connotations, several different meanings. So some of them overlap with the meanings, connotations of other words. So in certain contexts, in certain situations, they're synonymous. So in certain situations, cat and feline are synonymous, dog and what? Canine, light and featherly, but in other contexts, they're not exactly the same. So the mind that's able to, in certain contexts, to know that certain words are synonymous is also a quality of that wisdom of equality. An external sign of its dissolution, one is no longer mindful of the pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings that accompany the mental consciousness. One is no longer mindful. It doesn't mean that they are no longer there. When the feeling aggregate absorbs, the body consciousness can no longer experience pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings. Here, when the wisdom of equality absorbs, the mental consciousness is no longer mindful of pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings. They're still, it's not as though they're no longer experienced, but you're no longer as mindful of them. So it's somewhat similar. So almost all of the feelings go unrecognized at this point. An external sign of the dissolution of the water constituent, because the water element also absorbs now at the same time. So what did we have? The feelings are associated with water, the water element. So those of you who have done many water bowl offerings, has anyone, Thea, you've made a lot of water bowl offerings. Do you notice if you've done it a lot at that period of time, your feelings are more affected? Some people notice that. So there's a relationship between the water element and the feelings. So they're absorbing at the same time. So an external sign of the dissolution of the water element is that one's saliva, sweat, urine, blood, and regenerative fluid, semen, dry greatly. So it doesn't mean that the blood in your veins, suddenly, the doctors say, Mark had, how many pints of blood does a person usually have? 8 or 16? 8. I was going to say, there's a big difference. Mark has 16 and Diana has 8. It doesn't mean that the blood suddenly dries up, and if you put a needle in, nothing comes out. But it means that, say, for instance, if blood is on the surface, it doesn't remain moist, and it doesn't have the same nature that it did before. But certainly the saliva absorbs, is not as prevalent in the mouth. The lubricating fluid on the eyes and so forth dry up. The mouth, nose, tongue, and throat dry, and scum forms on the teeth. Oh, that sounds nice. Okay. An external sign of the dissolution of the ear sense power, which also takes place because earlier it was the eye sense. In order, the senses dissolve in a similar way to their order on the body. The eye absorbs first, then the ear element, the ear faculty along with the water element and the feeling aggregate, then the nose faculty along with the fire element, and the taste and tactile faculties along with the air element. They both go together with that. So that there's an order of gradation like that. As an external sign of the dissolution of the ear sense power, one can no longer hear external or internal sounds. What are internal sounds? when you're reciting the mantra internally? Oftentimes, if you sit in a very quiet place, you can hear the pumping of blood within your body, or the pumping of your heart and so forth. When you recite mantra internally, is that also not possible there? It has nothing to do with the ear organ. That's something in the mental consciousness, right? So that's not what's talked about here. As an external sign of the dissolution of the sounds included in one's own continuum, the sound inside the ears no longer arises. Now, those are the 5 external signs, in addition to the 5 objects that absorbed. The internal sign of the dissolution of these 5, this is what you would meditate on at this time and recognize, is the dawning of an appearance called smoke-like, the smoke-like appearance, or he says like smoke, which is like blue puffs of smoke. It is similar to smoke billowing from a chimney in the midst of a mass of smoke. Other lamas say that it is similar to in a meditation room, if you have some incense, the wafting of, already there's a little bit of incense pervading the air, but then there's more incense coming up. So there's a vision like this to your mental consciousness. So first of all, you would think, at the time of death, first the earth element absorbs, the form aggregate, and try to recognize what those signs are. And then meditate on the sign, the mirage-like vision in your mind. If you're practicing Tantra, you would also at that point do some other things. You would try to meditate on emptiness. With that mind that is slightly subtle and otherwise prone to distraction and fear, you would meditate on emptiness and try to prepare yourself for the clear light of death. Then as that vision begins to subside, the vision of smoke arises, smoke-like vision arises, and you know that now, you could do it this way. You could say, oh, now the water element is absorbing into fire. So the ear organ is dissolving, the feeling aggregate is dissolving. I can no longer feel within the body. The wisdom of equality is absorbing, so even I'm not mindful of the pleasurable or unpleasant feelings within the mind. Actually, so there's no great joy or great unhappiness at that time. Already one is probably what one regularly would call quite, it depends on the meditator, quite different state than one is experiencing now. So you can, when you meditate, you can start from the vision which starts to appear and try to think of the external signs that others would notice and that you would notice also, because you would notice that the saliva in your mouth is drying up and your eyes cannot, in the first case, the eyes cannot open and close in the way that you wish. How are we doing, Georgie? We have a couple minutes more?
Got 9 minutes.
So we'll talk about the third dissolution also. After that, the 5 phenomena on the level of the aggregate of discrimination dissolve simultaneously. So you oftentimes, remember we talk about the order of the aggregates. Why are they mentioned? Form aggregate, feeling aggregate, discrimination, compositional factors, and so forth. Here we find from Tantra another reason, because in the death evolution, the aggregates absorb in this order. Do you understand, David? So now the third group of things that are dissolving together, and we will have the vision of fireflies. This is the fire element absorbing into the air element, and that the level of the aggregate of discrimination dissolves simultaneously. 5 phenomena. As an external sign of the dissolution of the aggregate of discrimination dissolving, one is no longer mindful of the affairs of close persons, such as one's parents. The basic wisdom of analysis is associated with the aggregate of discrimination, This is explained to be the ordinary consciousness that is mindful of individual names, purposes, and so forth of close persons. As a sign of its dissolution, one can no longer remember the names even of one's parents, one's close friends. So if you were with a dying person, if they no longer, they didn't seem like they could see, but maybe there was still some consciousness there, but they no longer could remember names, your name or other names, that would mean already they're at least at this dissolution.
Is lack of recognition of someone part of this, or is it just names?
Well, no, also recognition, because sometimes some people translate this aggregate as the recognition aggregate. Remember when we talked in Mind and Mental Factors that there's some people call it discrimination, some people call it recognition. So it means recognizing and discriminating are very similar in this case. Not completely synonyms. It depends what you're talking about. Okay. And as an external sign of the dissolution of the fire element, the fire constituent. Why is it called constituent here? Remember what constituent is? When we talk about the four elements, we also talk about the 5 or 6 constituents that the person can be imputed upon. The 4 elements and what? Consciousness and space and consciousness, right? Like Nagarjuna said. So here, it means the same thing as the fire element. It's just talking about it in terms of in the group of 6. As an external sign of the dissolution of the fire constituent, the warmth of the body diminishes, and this would be when you would notice the heat beginning to diminish from the feet if you were born in the upper realm, or from the crown. If someone's crown starts getting cold and their feet are still warm, don't tell them you're going to hell. That probably won't make them happy, but you might suggest to them arduous, very seriously, that they try to meditate if they're still aware at that time. Whereupon the capacity to digest food and drink is lost. Okay. As an external sign of the dissolution of the nose sense power, the inhalation of wind and air through the nose is weak. The inhalation is weak, whereas the exhalation is strong and lengthy, and the breaths are as if piled on top of one another. So in other words, when it says in the teachings, the only thing that keeps us between life and death is the last exhalation, because if you exhale and you don't breathe back, you're dead, right? So the exhalations are strong because it's getting near the end. The inhalations are weak. Here, the breathing has not yet stopped on the dissolution of the fire element, and on that level. An external sign of the dissolution of the odors included within one's own continuum. It'd be nice if we could control this now. One cannot smell any fragrant or unfragrant odors of one's own body, I presume, because of the odors of one's own continuum. The internal sign of the dissolution of these 5, so this is the inner sign, is the arising of the firefly-like appearance. It is like burning red sparks seen within puffs of smoke rising from a chimney. Can you imagine that? Have you seen that? So there's some smoke is coming out and there's some sparks coming out. Sometimes it says it's like, sometimes they call firefly-like vision, as though fireflies are moving in space. Or like red sparks on the soot at the bottom of a pan used for parching grain. Well, I don't parch grain very often. Maybe you do, but let's end here for today. There's a lot of detail here that you might find daunting at first. It will be repeated again later in another context, but this is something that's very, very useful if you're interested in meditating on death, working with people that are dying, or preparing for your own death and to meditate on in Highest Yoga Tantra. This is what one meditates on at the time, in the time of the generation stage. You imagine these dissolutions taking place. And in so doing, as you're concentrating the mind can be getting subtler and subtler. And you can let go of other conceptual thoughts. You can use these as your objects of concentration, And actually, when you get to the clear light, imagining the clear light, you can have quite a quiet mind. So it's a very important practice to leave seeds to be able to practice the generation stage when one can actually withdraw the winds into the central channel. It's said that this kind of meditation in the generation stage is the ripening factor that can cause you to recognize these in the completion stage. So it's very, very important. So let's dedicate the merit that we've created. Sit comfortably and try to concentrate. Try to bring your mind to a quiet state as we did at the beginning. Concentrated state. Recognize that we've created virtuous karma tonight. By our motivation mainly, and our, at the beginning, that impelled this meditation, and the temporal motivations that arose when we might have been inspired by various things during the course of listening and thinking. May this merit not simply give rise to samsaric happiness in the future that might actually become the cause of my other delusions arising, but in whatever way that this merit ripens, may it become the cause of my continued Dharma practice, developing renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom of emptiness. Due to that practice, due to these merits, may I quickly achieve enlightenment through the practice of Highest Yoga Tantra. In this or in a lifetime very soon, solely motivated to quickly become available to sentient beings to lead them out of suffering into everlasting blissful happiness. So meditate also on the emptiness of the person that you imagine dedicating. The act of dedication includes the person dedicating. There is no I that is dedicating. There are no real findable merits that I am dedicating. They exist only as conventional imputations, designations. The goals dedicated to, although recognizable in the world, realizations, the achievement of enlightenment, only exist to the mind as designations. They don't have any inherent findable existence. Seal the dedication in the emptiness of the three spheres.